Now, today I want to talk about some low-tech habits, some old-school habits that can nourish the experience of family, especially in a high-tech, fast-paced, low-margin culture that we're all living in, and that's not going to change. The world is not going to slow down just for us. And these habits all relate to, they're all ordinary kinds of practices, things that God has given us as sacred habits that glue the family together, but they've been commoditized over time with our technological worldview pressing toward efficiency, predictability, and high control. Now, these are holy habits. They are things that occur in a sacred context, but the fast pace of our culture has fragmented them, separated from them from that context, and reduced them to thin facsimiles of what God had intended them to be, kind of shallow reflections of something richer and deeper in the abundant life that Christ has called us to. And they leave us less than satisfied in the long run. But the problem in a technological culture is we learn to take those commodities and then feel like, well, they're good enough for all practical purposes. It's not really what I want, but it'll do. My hope today is to encourage you to add layers of depth to these two practices and put them back into a sacred context so that you can enjoy them more fully and enjoy the benefits that come from them. Now, that is a matter of perspective. Now, let me illustrate what I mean. This is just a loaf of bread. You know, I bought it because I've had good luck with this particular brand of bread. It's admittedly a good loaf of bread, but I don't really know what's in it. I know that it's cost effective. I know that its quality is predictable. And frankly, it's a decent starch to go with a meal. That's all I know. Other than that, it's just a loaf of bread. But you know, to the baker, this is more than just a loaf of bread. This is an expression of his craft. He knows exactly the grains that are in it, cares about the color and the texture. He could tell you certain things about the process of making the bread that would give you an understanding of the richness of this, and maybe even an understanding of why it's $5 a loaf. Beyond that experience is the experience of the wheat farmer. To him, it's not just a reflection of craft. It's an expression of his livelihood and his passion and the provision of God for his family. You see, the more engaged you are with a loaf of bread, the more real the thing becomes. It has layers of depth. The same thing is true of wine. Now, this is grape juice. And to me, it's just a glass of grape juice. It's something you drink with the bread. To a person who enjoys wine, it's just a particular glass of wine that maybe you buy at the store, and the reason you buy it is it's less than $15. And, you know, it is used to greet your guests, relaxes you after work, and gives you something to wash down the meal. Now, to a wine connoisseur, it's a particular grape from a particular vineyard that has overtones of blackberry and rose and aromatics and just a hint of smoke, right? To the vintner who makes it, it's an expression of art. Every year reminds them of the people that were involved in that particular vintage. Whether or not it was good, how sweet was it, each one is different. To the vineyard owner, it's the passion and purpose of his life. You see the layers of depth in the thing? Now put them both together. For some of us, it's just a great snack that is dying to add some cheese. To others, maybe it represents what goes on at a family meal. And the particular vintage, the particular kind of bread, reminds you of specific memories or things that went on. Maybe it's a bottle of wine that graced your 5th wedding anniversary. And you can't hardly enjoy it without remembering something of that event. For others, those of us in the family of God, it's a memorial to forgiveness and life. It represents the sacrifice and the promise or the covenant that's in the person of Jesus Christ. Do you see the depths of layers? How you experience the bread and the wine depends upon how you look at it and the care you take in appreciating it. Is it just bread and wine, or does it represent community and covenant, sacrifice and promise? Is it just something to eat, or is it the table of presence? The presence of people you love and the presence of God. See, the table is a common privilege that God has given to us to celebrate and to remember or communicate a sense of sacredness, of presence with one another. And it can be that if we'll look at it that way. Now, I want to talk about two specific habits that over the years have been so significant in my own marriage and family. I've been married 30 years. And the only thing that tells you is I've done it all wrong 100 times, but we just kept at it. Okay? You know what the key to marriage is, people? Stubbornness. A stubborn love. You just stay there. And after 30 years, you kind of say, well, where else would I go? But the things that I've learned in my stubborn love with my family, there are a couple of things that I want to share with you that our perspective of them is so important. They are habits that God has given the family, but our culture has so emptied them of their sacred content and reduced them to mundane routine and practices that they're often less than satisfying to us. They have to do with two of the most common things in life: food and sex. The table and the bedroom. The way we eat and the way we sleep, so to speak. Eating together and sleeping together. And of course, the less threatening one is food, so that's the one I'm going to start with. All right? You know, it's remarkable how much of the ministry of Jesus Christ centers around food. If you read the Gospels, he's always going to a meal, coming for a meal, or eating a meal. In fact, the Gospel writers don't call it eating a meal, they call it reclining at table. Taking his time, laying around the table with his bros. His ministry to his disciples was around the table. His last ministry to them was around the table, around the food. Did you know that his first request to his disciples when he appeared to them after the resurrection was, "Have you anything here to eat?" Well, I imagine he'd been laying in a tomb for 3 days. Probably was pretty hungry. Is there anything here to eat? And when we see Jesus again, it will be because of an invitation he's given us to a marriage feast, the Feast of the Lamb. It is a world full of eating. You know, the first challenge the early church had to deal with was how to feed the widows. And the fellowship of the early church centered around breaking bread and the apostles' teaching. They ate together as a celebration of and a commitment to community. Consider 1 Corinthians chapter 11 with me for a minute. Verse 17 begins, Paul says, "In the following instructions I don't commend you, because when you come together, it's not for better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear there are divisions among you, and I believe it in part. For there must be factions among you, in order that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. Now, when you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat, for in eating each one goes ahead with his own meal. One goes hungry, another gets drunk." What? Don't you have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I commend you in this? No, I will not. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night when he was betrayed took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way also he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." What Paul is doing is giving the communion meal, the love feast in the early church, the depth it desires or requires. You see, eating together in the early church was a sacred practice, and it was different than filling your gut. Paul says, if you want to just fill your gut, do that at home. It was a celebration of common life and common purpose. and it involved time. If you look at the text, you see waiting for one another. You see patience. You see deference to others. You see manners and social skills. See, the table was the center of the early church's community. And done correctly, it united the church, but neglected and done selfishly, it divided the church. That's what this text says. And I'm just suggesting that what was true of the early church is still true, especially when applied to the family, what I call the domestic church. Okay? Especially when applied there. There may be nothing with as much potential to focus and unite our families as the family table. It's a remarkable thing. But you have to make it a priority from the very beginning of your family. You know, when I was a boy, it was really common for families to have dinner together almost every night. That's not so much true anymore, but it was then. I mean, we didn't really have much TV. It was all black and white, you know, in the late 50s. It didn't, well, nothing on, you know, really. There wasn't much technology. Well, lots of technology, but not so fast-paced. And so for us, it was a matter of routine in our home. There were 4 children. Mom and Dad had 4 kids, and we all had responsibilities. There were no dishwashers. My dad said, Mom gave birth to 4 dishwashers. Why would I need to buy one? That was my dad's perspective, you know, and it was just expected of us. We all had tasks. One would help cook, a different person every day. Another would set the table. We would clear the table. We'd do the dishes. And here's the point. No one was done until everyone was done. So dinner began with the cooking and it ended with the cleanup. We always waited for Granddad to show up because he ate with us. He was alone and he'd come over and eat with us. And Granddad would come. We'd all sit down and he would pray, and he prayed way too long because the chicken smelled too good. You know what I mean? You're kind of like, come on, Grandpa, get her done. All kinds of things you wanted to do. Then we'd pass the food. And you know, you learned certain skills at the table. For example, no one at our table could eat until everyone was served. And you learned to take just one portion and to pass it around and make sure everybody got some. You learn to defer to other people. I don't know how many times I was told that I had to learn to say, excuse me, would anyone else care for a bit of that last piece of chicken? Instead of just grabbing it. You know, throwing a piece of chicken in front of my brother and I is like throwing a hockey puck in a face-off circle, man. We were going after it, and at the table, you couldn't do that. We always say, would you please excuse me from the table? It was a place of manners, and yet the table was not just a place for rules. It was a place of grace and great acceptance. The context in which we told stories. What happened in your day today? What are the highs? What are the lows? And if conflict arose, my dad would always say, we'll solve that after dinner when we're away from the table. Isn't that interesting? The table was it's still a thick and rich memory from my childhood, because no matter what happened in our family, no matter what, we gathered at the table. And there was a chair for me. It was where I belonged, next to my sister and across from my brother. I knew I belonged in the family when we sat at the table. Today, we have technologies to diminish the labor and decrease the time involved in feeding the family dinner. But I just want you to know, getting dinner and sharing the table are very different kinds of experiences. One is thin and the other is thick. One is shallow and the other is rich. One only satisfies one dimension of our hunger. It fills our stomachs but not our souls. It's efficient, it's predictable, you can do it quickly, it's controllable, whereas the table is none of those things. The experience of the table is inefficient. It takes a lot of time. Making your own chicken cordon bleu takes a lot more time than buying some at Costco. But there's something about pounding the chicken breasts and rolling the prosciutto and the Swiss cheese in it breading it in panko, cooking it and serving it with a nice tarragon cream sauce. Making you hungry? There's something about doing that that is rich and engaging, see? A couple of weeks ago, my wife made pad thai. She made pad thai because my oldest daughter loves it. There's tremendous grace at the table. My wife used about 4 times the amount of tamarind that the recipe called for. I'll never forget sitting down at the table, dishing out that pad thai. It was almost black in its color. My son-in-law, Luke, reached over and got some, put it in his mouth. I thought he was going to vomit right there at the table. He just gagged. My wife, you should have seen the look on her face. It was horrible. And just about 30 seconds went by, and then we all just fell apart laughing. We got up and we put all the pad thai in a strainer and we rinsed it under the water, tasted it again, and it was horrible. We wound up eating grilled cheese sandwiches. I'll never forget that experience. I can't eat pad thai today without laughing. You feel that? There's something in that. The table is where we learn to belong. In my home today, 3 times each and every week, we celebrate the table as a family. And we try to do it once on the weekend, between Monday and Friday, and we take time to do that. We take time in preparation. We relax through dinner. We tell stories. We talk about our highs and our lows. Everybody cleans up. There are no phones. There are no iPods. There are no televisions. There's no computers. None of that stuff. From the minute we start cooking till the time it's done cleaning up. My teenagers hate it. My grown kids call and ask if they can bring their spouses and come back and join the family. You see, there are times that we might eat in front of the TV, but that's not the table. That's the TV tray. They're different experiences. They're good experiences, but different. And all I'm saying is, the table's important. As you start and continue your adventure in family, don't underestimate the power of the table. If you don't have any skills in cooking or hospitality, learn some. It's a dying skill in the Church of Jesus Christ, the skill of the gift of hospitality. Take a culinary arts class. If they don't have one at Biola, ask them to offer one. If they can't offer one, go to a community college and get one. Pick up a copy of Cuisine at Home or Martha Stewart Living, for crying out loud. Guys, you might want to read that in your own private space. I don't know. I mean, this is California, Did I just make another insensitive, offensive comment? The table is where we learn to belong. Okay, in the same way that the table celebrates community, the bedroom celebrates covenant. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I want you to listen very carefully. From the heart of an older man who's enjoyed his wife for 30 years. Sex is to marriage what communion is to salvation. It is the covenant feast. It's the sacramental celebration. It's where we learn to submit ourselves and surrender to the needs and to the pleasure of someone that we've covenanted with for a lifetime, to love and to be faithful to. Look for a moment over at 1 Corinthians 7, verses 1 through 5. Paul says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, this passage says a lot of things about marriage and about sex in marriage, but I want to point out two concepts. First, this passage clearly says that marriage provides the God-given context for expressing our sexuality. In the context of marriage, it is good and it is right. It is spectacular, a celebration of oneness, a creative act that can result in family. It's kind of a context of trust and commitment and desire. See, sex in marriage is about surrendering personal authority, this text says. It's about giving away your own rights to someone else who you trust. It's about seeing your body and your life as a sacrifice for somebody else. It's never self-focused. It's not about my satisfaction, but it's about satisfying the person I love. Well, let me tell you, that is never efficient. It is seldom predictable, and you cannot control it. Well, the world we live in has said, no, that's not really what it is. And it's dragged sex out of its sacred context. See, to take sex out of marriage or to treat it as merely a physical pleasure or to approach it for self-satisfaction is to rip it out of the context of covenant, to fragment it and reduce it to commodities so that an orgasm is a commodity. The affirmation of being held is a commodity. Sex is a mechanism by which you enjoy that commodity, and the person you do it with is a device. And if it doesn't satisfy, go look for a different device that will. You want sexual satisfaction? We have an app for that. You understand? When that happens in the bedroom, let me tell you, it permeates the entire marriage. Because the question of marriage is who and what is it about? If it's about me, then I take. If it's about what my spouse needs, then I give. If it's about the glory of God, then I worship in all of it. And no matter how inefficient, unpredictable, or uncontrollable it may be. You know, men and women, God doesn't ask us to pursue sexual purity because He's trying to deny us pleasure. You know, I was always told, I didn't come to Christ till I was 22, and when I was in church, they always said, it's dirty, that's a bad thing, you'll go blind. I didn't go blind if I once was blind, but now I see, you know what I mean? It's kind of that thing. And the idea was that it felt like there was something wrong with it. There's not. It's just like anything else in life. God gives us contexts in which He wants us to enjoy maximum pleasure. That's why He says, keep it in marriage, keep it faithful, so there's no guilt associated with this act. Sex outside of marriage means no more than communion outside of salvation. It's just a lousy little piece of unleavened bread and some grape juice that's pretending to be wine. But in the covenant relationship, it's life and promise and grace. It's rich and deep and thick. You know, if you were to ask 100 people on the street, even Christians, why did Jesus come? What do you think they'd say? Huh? What did He come? To forgive us of our sin? To die for me? But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it, what? Abundantly. Now, I'm just an old country boy. I think that means better than. I think abundantly means richer than. I think it means deeper than. And my heart for each and every one of you is in the area of sex as well as family, that you'll have the richest, deepest, most spectacular experience available to the creation of God. The table and the bedroom. These are contexts for learning and enjoying community and covenantal love. And isn't it interesting that they're also probably the two things, food and sex? Don't they probably represent the two most common addictions in our culture? Isn't that amazing? We as a culture in the United States have more food than any nation in the history of the planet. And yet we're less than satisfied with the food that we've got. We are the most sexed generation in all of human history, and the least satisfied with the sex that we experience. Something's wrong, don't you think? So don't let the fast-paced, highly efficient, totally predictable, and ultimately controlling worldview of the technological age invade those two areas. Keep them low-tech. Make them old-fashioned. And I promise you, God will grant you something new from that storehouse each and every day. God bless you and thank you. You're dismissed.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.